Hi guys, it is Aoife from Words of Clover and I am here to do my February wrap up. A little bit belated, but better late than never. So I read 11 books in February. It was actually a really good reading month for me. Especially like the last few months, I feel like I haven't been reading as much, but February was really good for me. So I was very happy with the books that I read. So the first book I finished in February was actually an audiobook that I'd been reading, and that was Aisling Ever After by Sarah Breen and Emer McLysaght. And this is the fifth and final book in the Oh My God, What a Complete Aisling series, which is about an Irish girl called Aisling, and we follow her. She's hitting her like late 20s, early 30s, I think, in the first book, and she's in this relationship that feels like it's not really going anywhere. He seems to be on a different page than her, and this is all kind of stemmed from like this typical Irish country girl working in Dublin, and she's very wholesome. Has a lot of characteristics that they say that a lot of Irish girls have, and I am kind of a thing of like, if you aren't an Aisling, you will definitely know an Aisling, and I definitely know a few Aislings. So obviously I am quite, but then there's also like parts of Aisling that I do see in myself as well. But I definitely see most Irish, with women particularly, I guess, who would be reading this, definitely will see different parts of themselves in Aisling. But this has been a really fun series. I've really enjoyed, and in this book we see Aisling. The fourth book ended on like a massive cliffhanger, and in the fifth one we see Aisling make a really really big decision about her future, about whether she's coming or going, and we see things kind of really take a turn in her life. For the better for the most part, but it actually depends on the reader and what they want for Aisling, I guess. Some people might be disappointed in the direction she goes in, other people might like the direction she goes in. So I think this is a real kind of split review type of book where people will either go one way or the other way in terms of how they felt Aisling's story wrapped up in this. I actually kind of had seen some hints of what was going to be happening in this book for Aisling, some of the really big life moments, some of the obstacles that she was going to have to face, and there's also kind of a decision that she does make that historically for me would have been a disappointing one, because it's to do with someone who I wasn't a huge fan of for most of the series, and I really thought I wasn't going to enjoy this one as much, but I ended up actually really really enjoying it. I don't know whether it's just because I find the audiobooks in particular, like, they're just really warm and comforting, and yeah, there's just something I really love about spending time with Aisling, and I just really enjoyed seeing how everything ended up for her. I do think there was parts of this that felt a little bit rushed. It didn't really feel like this is the last book in the series. It's a very beloved series for Irish readers, and I do feel like the authors are really trying to wrap everything up in a really neat bow for Aisling, but also for Aisling fans. And there's parts of it that were almost like, obviously not everything works out for Aisling, but so much of it does end up in like this really lovely kind of neat little bow. And because obviously we want that for Aisling too, but yeah, there's parts of this that were just like almost like it did feel like it was kind of a like trying to get everything kind of sorted for her, and put Aisling on the road, like, you know, to where you really know what's going to be happening, where she's going, no kind of questions left unanswered. But I still did really enjoy this. I gave this a solid 4 out of 5 stars. I think it's the second book is still my favorite book in the series. But this one I still did really enjoy. It actually surprised me at how much I enjoyed it, because I actually didn't think I was going to enjoy it as much, but ended up still being a very pleasant read for me. The next book I read is also part of a series. It's the fourth book in this Shardlake series. So this is Revelation by CJ Sansom. This is a historical kind of like mystery slash, it's historical fiction with kind of like this mystery kind of thrillery element to it, because in this book series we follow this lawyer called Matthew Shardlake, and at the time he's almost like, a lot of the things he does ends up kind of being more like almost like a detective or an investigator. And in this, we always get kind of two different cases that he kind of ends up being involved in. One of the cases he gets involved in is a young boy who's been brought to like the Bedlam asylum, saying that he has gone kind of crazy. There's a lot of like, he is kind of talking kind of crazily in terms of religion, and people are calling him a heretic. There's a lot of issues at this time period. It's kind of just before King Henry VIII married Catherine Parr. It's like as he's pursuing Catherine Parr, and there's a lot of things around Catholics and Protestants, and people are kind of being like, you know, jailed for being a heretic and for religious fever and stuff like that. So we're seeing this boy kind of who genuinely very much seems mentally ill, but he's kind of been affected by very strong religious beliefs, and what he's saying is stuff that people aren't liking, so he's been put away. And Matthew's basically trying to make a case for him that he's ill and needs help and shouldn't be like hung for being a heretic or anything worse, or being tortured or anything like that. And then we also see kind of this pretty gruesome kind of serial killer trail, which actually ends up in the death of one of Matthew's friends at the start of the book. And he kind of quickly realizes that there is kind of this serial killer element, but obviously at a time like serial killers wouldn't have even been a thing. So they're like, how could someone do something so bad? Why would someone do this? And it's all kind of connected to, again, religion and the Bible, particularly the book of Revelation. And we see him with his friends and with his sidekicks kind of sort this out. I really enjoy this. I always enjoy the Shardlake series. There's just so much history in there. There's so much story. I think Matthew as a character is one of my favorite characters I've read about, particularly in historical fiction. There were some like kind of disappointing elements in terms of some side characters and how they were acting. And then we also like, I feel like in every book there's kind of always this kind of, it's not really a red herring, but it's like more like there's always a woman that Shardlake ends up kind of being kind of puppy doggish going after, and it never works out for him. And like, I'm kind of getting to the point where I'm like, we're 4 books in. I would love to have like a female character who's actually going to like stay in his life and who actually treats him nice and that doesn't break his heart. Because I just feel like we just keep seeing him kind of get his hopes up and kind of start liking someone and then get either shut down or, you know, something happens. So I'd like to see him get like a little bit of luck in his romantic life, if he's going to have any luck at all. So yeah, this is good. 4 out of 5 stars, and I will definitely be reading the next one. This book was also a historical fiction. It was The Glassmaker by Tracy Chevalier. This is kind of a different kind of one because it's historical fiction, but it's mixed with kind of like magical realism because there's a magical element to this. We are following a character who lives in Venice. She doesn't live in Venice. She lives in Murano, and her family specialise in the Murano kind of glass making. And we see her at the start and we see how this is a very like male dominated field, that she's kind of thought that she's the woman of like the sister. She's basically there just to wash and clean up after the men, and then as they bring wives in, she's like left to look after the children, and again like not really have a life of her own. She's almost like a servant in many ways, and she really doesn't like that. She kind of wants her own agency. She wants to do her own bit for the family, and she starts learning how to make these little glass beads. And we see how kind of this transforms her family's kind of future in different ways. But then the magical element of this comes in that we kind of have the family and the characters are all staying like the same age, but outside of them, and a lot of like the characters that they know as well, like their side characters, their friends, etc., kind of stay the same age, but then everything around them like will jump forward like a century. So at the start of this book we are like in, oh god, I don't even know, but like it's where like the plague has like hit basically, and then by the end of the book we are in like COVID and pandemic, but just as an example of how like the time works with that. But the characters are all the same, they just kind of age really really slowly, but they don't realize it either. It's just kind of an element for the story, I guess. And like that was good, but I also was kind of like, I don't know whether it was like to try and capture this like timeless art of glass making, how there's so much in glass making that stayed the same while, you know, the world kind of happened around it. I did really like kind of this, like the look at that like insular population that would have been Murano, and the secrecy of the glass making, and how I never knew that they didn't want, like they would have punished people for like leaving and like sharing the secret somewhere else, and that was really interesting. The male characters in this were particularly like some of the family members, like the brothers, were kind of horrific just in terms of like, they're just so misogynistic, and yeah, just like really horrible, and never really like, I don't know, just like they don't like look after the sister that well, basically. I don't think they don't really treat her that well. And we do see like her being used almost like as a drudge, like for so much of her life, but and never really getting the credit she deserves as well for like trying so hard for the family. But this was good. I did enjoy it. I don't think it would be one that like would really like stick with me for a long time, or one that I'd be like, oh, you should really definitely read this. But I still enjoyed it. I gave it like 3.5 out of 5 stars. Then the next book I listened to was also an audiobook, and this was a non-fiction book. It was a memoir, and it was called What We Carry by Maya Shanbhag Lang. And this is kind of a memoir about Maya's relationship with her mother, and it kind of starts at the time where Maya is pregnant with her own daughter, and she is kind of looking towards her mother for obviously like help and advice, and she kind of very quickly kind of sinks into this really like terrible bout of postpartum depression, and she's reaching out to her mother for help, and her mother basically turns her back on her in a way that like she felt like her mother was always there for her entire life, for her whenever she would want her or need her, and the time that she needs her the most, and the time that she would value her mother's care and love and advice the most, her mother basically says, well, I'm not bothered to help you. And this really like obviously hurts and affects her, and she has to deal with things on her own. And then a few years later, it comes to light that her mother is suffering from dementia, and then she eventually ends up becoming her mother's carer and bringing her mother in, and she just kind of talks about some of her relationship with her mother, how how it changes, how she becomes like the cared for becomes the carer, and then also her relationship with her daughter during all of this, her daughter's relationship with her grandmother, and then also how she looks back at her own childhood with her mother and sees the ways in which her mother actually didn't look after her and wasn't there for her, and how kind of she had created this idea of her mother in her head that actually never really existed. And there's parts of it that were really like poignant and enlightening, and there's a real truth, and there's also like almost like a heavy truth to some of the things that she's saying about her mother as well, and the hardships there is of like caring for her mother, but also the ways in which her mother failed her, that I feel like is very brave to like obviously talk about. And I will say, like, it didn't seem like obviously her mother was suffering like from dementia, but just before that, when her mother like failed to show up for her when she needed her, when she was like so low, had just had a baby, and was basically left to fend for herself by her mother. It was very hard to read that, because I just like couldn't imagine a world in which I would ring my mom and ask for her help and she would refuse me. Like, it would just never happen. And just the thought of that happening to someone is just like so heartbreaking. So there are parts of this that were really heartbreaking, and there are parts of it that were probably tougher to read. And I say especially if you have a loved one who's going through a debilitating illness like that, where they need to be cared for, particularly ones where it involves maybe memory loss, or like that kind of motor function loss as well. I say, like, there's parts of this that you might like, that kind of carer burnout is definitely present in this as well. She talks about that that you might appreciate, but there also might be some hard bits for other people. But I gave this 3.5 stars as well. It was good. I appreciated the honesty in it. It's just not like my favorite memoir that I've ever read, but I still enjoyed it for the few hours that I read. Then I read a book that I've had on my shelf for a while, and this is a kind of Irish thriller, and it's Body of Truth by Marie Cassidy. And one of the reasons why I wanted to read this is that Marie Cassidy is actually a former state pathologist for Ireland, so she's kind of like was a well-known figure, especially if there's obviously like high profile murder cases and inquests and stuff like that. And this is a novel that she has written, and we are following a female state pathologist whose name is Terry. And at the start of this, Terry has just moved from Ireland to Ireland from Scotland. So she's still kind of settling into her role, kind of realizing that when you're like a state pathologist in Ireland, but particularly when you're like probably a female one at that, you kind of become like this like minor celebrity, and particularly like for the news media and stuff, which is actually like definitely a thing, or definitely was a thing for Marie Cassidy anyway. And she starts investigating this murder, and this like body is found in the park, and it's pretty gruesome, and this woman has been clearly quite violently killed, and she starts kind of connecting the dots to these other murders that have taken place, and feels like there might be a serial killer, but no one will listen to her. And like, this is real different in terms of like, if I've listened to, or like if I have read books where there's a coroner or a pathologist who is investigating a murder, they normally like team up with a detective, and everything they say is like really like listened to and taken on board. Where for Terry in this, like she's completely ostracized, like the police don't want her help, they think that she's messing around, that it's not her department, this is not her job. Her job is just to say how this person died. It's not to actually investigate a serial killer or a murderer or anything like that. And I feel like this had a lot of potential, but like at the end of the day, I just didn't really enjoy it. There was just something about the writing that felt a little bit wooden. I feel like there was just parts of Terry and her background, particularly with the type of murders that were taking place as well, that was just like that convenient. Like, of course she has this, like this happened to her in the past, and would connect her to this case, or would give her, like, you know, reasons to feel a particular way about this case. So yeah, it's just, there was just parts of it that I didn't love. I found like even the way that like things kind of fall together for her and how she figured stuff out were just a little bit, was like not great. And then also I just kept comparing this. I think it's because obviously she's like a state pathologist, would be very similar to like a coroner. Basically the same thing. I kept comparing it to like, say, like the Will Trent series with like Sarah Linton, or obviously the Grand County series where Sarah's in it as well, and the way she would get involved and the type of murders that she would do. And they're very similar in terms of they tend to be like female, the victims tend to be female focused, they can be quite violent. You know, there's kind of a message there around the violence against women, and the amount of women who are killed, particularly like by the hands of men. And I just felt like, you know, Karen Slaughter does it better. So yeah, I just kind of kept comparing it, which probably isn't fair to this book, but I just felt like Marie Cassidy's really good, was obviously really good at being the state pathologist, and maybe she should just, you know, stick to what she knows, because I just don't think this was particularly great. So I gave it like a 2.5 out of 5 stars. I read a kind of fun, quirky sci-fi novel, and it's called Moon Dust in My Hairnet by J.R. Creaden. And this is one that we take is like kind of like dystopian sci-fi, and we are following a young girl. She's like 20, I think she's in her early 20s, and she has just moved to the moon with her family and her boyfriend. And we find out that her sister, her older sister, was kind of this amazing kind of genius who basically, like, when she was like really young, invented this device that meant that like gravity could be a thing like on the moon or in outer space, that would mean that like you could live like in a colony. And she also like kind of pioneered this whole trip and this whole way of living on the moon. But right before the trip, her sister and a bunch of other people were killed by this other kind of like military organization. So, but they still obviously went to the moon, but now she's there without her sister. She was always supposed to be there with her sister, and she's really dealing with the grief of losing her sister and what it means to be here now for the rest of her life on the moon without her sister, when her sister was literally the reason why everyone is here. And this is her just kind of figuring out like who she is now. She is figuring out like a romantic relationship. She has her boyfriend, but she's also kind of figuring out like relationships that they're in kind of like a poly kind of open relationship, and we see kind of this little polyamorous relationship kind of thing happening, almost like a little, they had a name for it, I can't remember now what it was, but like a little family like relationship. And then she's also autistic as well, so we see that playing a big part, and kind of like that neurodivergence in like so many different forms with so many different characters in this, which was a really great representation. We see like so many different forms of autism, and also how people's autism like presents itself to the world, but also how people hide their autism as well. Like you see like different ways of stimming, of just like controlling, of masking, of unmasking. And it was just a really interesting book in terms of like just that autism rep as well. I feel like I haven't seen it in that way as much. I do feel like the book, in terms of like overall where it was going, or like in terms of the military aspect and the kind of the tension aspect of it, wasn't as well thought out as just like the general kind of cozy living on the moon bit. Like I didn't really understand the military aspect and why they were doing what they were doing. It was kind of, it's not even a military, it's more like a militia, and I was like, why are they doing what they're doing? Why are they able to do all of this? And yeah, I couldn't really figure that part out. But I did really like kind of the more cozy, like living, just general living on the moon bits. This is a 3 out of 5 stars. I enjoyed it. It was fun, and yeah, it was just a bit unusual and a bit of fun. And then I read the third book in the Discworld City Watch or Night Watch books, and that was Feet of Clay by Terry Pratchett. And in this one we are following along with the City Watch corporal, or is he corporal or sergeant Carrot now, and all the different characters that are in the City Watch, and they start investigating these golems that seem to have like killed people, and there's like a mystery around these golems because golems are supposed to have like no free will, so how would they be able to kill people if they have no free will? And this is just funny and silly and lovely, and there's just so much about like this particular like branch of this series, like the City Watch. I just love it so much. I just have so much fun every time I read one of these novels, because you never know really what you're going to get into. And yeah, there's just so many like really, really like genuine laugh out loud moments in them. So I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. I don't even really think like I can review them properly, because like my review is literally just like, I really liked them and they made me laugh and I had a good time. That was it. There's nothing really substantial about how I would review these books, except that I just really enjoyed them. And then I read this Mortal Coil, which was a reread for me. I first read this in like, God, 2018, I think, or 2017. It had been a while since I had reread it, and I just wanted to like immerse myself in the world again. So this is a dystopian book where we are following a character called, what is her name again? Katarina. And she is living on her own. Her dad is basically like this famous scientist, and he was taken by this big corporation like over a year ago to help with the cure for this like virus that is happening. But Katarina has been staying on her own in this cabin, and the virus is basically where like people almost get like, it's almost like reverse zombieism in a way. It's like people basically just get like this fever and they start like emitting this, I don't know, this thing, until they eventually kind of actually like burst into pieces. And the only way you can stay free of it, or kind of get like it's not even a cure, but kind of like a reprieve for a few weeks, is if you find someone right before they like are at the stage of bursting, and if you kill them and eat some of their flesh. And so it's obviously not very nice. And we're following Katarina. And the big part of this book is genetic coding. Like this is a huge part of the book. Everyone has kind of like panels in their arms, everything. They have loads of gen tech, and this is a huge part of the book. And Katarina is a really good coder, but she has a thing where she actually can't use a lot of the code on herself, because she has like this it's just something she was born with, where she's almost like allergic to that type of tech. So even though she's really good at it and she sees loads of other people being able to use it, she actually can't really use it herself. And at the start of the book, we see her get discovered by this guy called Coil, who apparently has been sent by her father to come to get her. And they realise that she has the key to actually figuring out the virus or the vaccine for this virus. And they go on this like journey to try and do that. And they kind of learn more about each other. And Katarina also learns a lot more about herself than she ever knew before. And this was fun. I still really enjoyed it. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, probably not like a 5 out of 5 stars, which might have been before. It's still very like YA in parts, kind of like not insta-lovey, but like very intense in parts. But I still really like the gen tech aspect of it. I feel like I hadn't seen so much of that before when I first read this book. And I still think there's been some books where like I haven't seen as much of it, but I felt like the coding and the gen tech in this was just such a really like interesting kind of new element of dystopian YA fiction at the time. That yeah, it was fun and I enjoyed it, and I'm going to read the second book and then eventually read the third book. So I never got around to reading the third book, so that's one of the reasons why I'm rereading this now, so I can eventually move on and see how the whole series ends up. And then I read The Heart Principle, which is by Helen Hoang, and this is the third book in the Kiss Quotient kind of series, though you can read them all like as standalones. In this one we were following Quan, who has been like a side character in the first 2 books, and he is recovering from an illness that has kind of left him a bit dented when it comes to confidence, particularly like in his romantic life and in his body confidence and stuff like that. And he decides he wants to kind of get back out there and maybe meet someone that he can have a little bit of fun with. And he meets Anna on a dating site, and Anna has just been not really broken up with by her boyfriend, but he basically told her that he wants to marry her, but first he wants to be able to sleep around with some other women, and just see what he's missing before he, commits himself to her. Basically, like, he's a massive jackass. And Anna is very clearly, from the very start of this book, you can tell she's neurodivergent. She has particular ways of treating herself and seeing the world and interpreting how people are saying things to her. It definitely seems that she is obviously on the spectrum, but she herself has never actually realised this. And we actually see at the start, like kind of in the start, the middle of the book, a therapist actually does say to her that I believe that you are on the autism spectrum. We kind of see the like light coming into her again, and she realizes that she's like seen for the first time. She has to be able to understand herself for the first time. So that like autism diagnosis and seeing it represented in Anna was actually a really lovely thing to see. But I actually overall didn't enjoy this book that much. I think I just didn't feel the chemistry was there between Quan and Anna. They kind of get serious enough, or like Quan kind of seems like he falls for Anna really, really quickly. But nothing really seems to happen between them for like a long time, and it kind of feels like there's a lot of this. There's also kind of a carer element for a parent who's very, very ill in this, from Anna's side. And I know it seems to be like a personal thing for the author, because as she was reading this, she was caring for her mother who was sick, so she put a lot of that carer guilt and carer burnout into the story with Anna. And I just felt the two side by side just felt a little bit weird for me. This really kind of complicated caring situation with Anna and her dad. And then you'd have kind of a scene that was kind of romantic between her and Quan. And I just felt like the two of them they just were like mismatched. And I just didn't really enjoy it. And that was just for me. I just didn't really like it. I think Anna's like whole family were like pretty horrible, and like a lot of people in her life were like just genuinely quite horrible and like didn't understand her, and we don't see a lot of that resolved either. That was kind of sad for her, but I guess also the reality for a lot of people. But yeah, it was just more the chemistry and then that kind of mismatch that I just didn't enjoy that much, so I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. And then I read a chunker of an audiobook, which was The Book That Wouldn't Burn by Mark Lawrence. This is the first book in his library trilogy, it was like I think like 23 hours long or something. And in this one we are following two characters. We are following a little girl called Elvira, who seems to have or Livira, not Elvira, who has lived her whole life in this like part of this like world that she's living in the dust, and she's basically like very poor. They're kind of like these farmers who like there's nothing on the land really to even eat, and then these creatures come to her village basically and destroy everyone in the village, kill everyone, take her captive, and then on her way to wherever they're taking her, she ends up being rescued by these soldiers and taken to this city where she eventually becomes an apprentice of this huge, vast, kind of never-ending magical library. And from there, she kind of is introduced to reading and books and the magical element of the library, how dangerous it is, how you can get lost, like never be found again. And then we also start following the point of view of a boy called Ivar, who seems to be like in his early 20s, and he's lived in this library his entire life. We see he's living in a very kind of different world, or a different part of the world than Livira, but they still have this like library in common. And his growing up like dynamic, his family dynamic is like really different to anything we've seen. And yeah, it takes like a while for the two worlds to kind of collide and for you to kind of start figuring out what is going on. Like there's an element of time, there's magic, there is creatures, there's a big war brewing outside as well by the creatures who killed Livira's family and people. They're called the Sabas, and we see them kind of like this restlessness is kind of growing like outside of the city, and they're eventually getting ready to attack the city. So Livira's time, like she is in a lot of danger from this as well. And we see how her and Ivar's worlds eventually collide. And this was quite long, but I did really enjoy it. But at the same time, I can't say that I understood every element of it. But I did really enjoy the end and the twists and turns near the end and the reveals, and how you kind of like, it's just like you get to the end and everything kind of just like starts clicking into place, and you're like, oh my god, like maybe I need to like reread the whole thing from the start now that I know what I know, and see how I interpret things differently. But I did really enjoy it, and I generally avoid reading fantasy books like this in audiobook because I'm afraid of missing out and stuff. But I genuinely did really enjoy the audiobook of this. I thought it was done really, really well. And I have reserved the next book on audiobook for my library as well. So I'll try and listen to that on audiobook as well. But yeah, I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. I did really enjoy it. It was really clever. I have enjoyed a lot of Mark Lawrence's books, but I definitely feel like this is a step up to what he's done before. And yeah, I'm excited to see how the series ends up. And yeah. And then I got to the second book in a series that I started like a good few years ago. And that is The Tropic of Serpents, the Lady Trent memoirs by Marie Brennan. This is the second book. And in this we are in kind of like an alternate historical country. Like, this is a fantasy world, but it's very like where Lady Trent is from is very much based on England. And in this one we see her son is a few years old, and we see her go to a new kind of not expedition, but yeah, expedition, she's basically like going to kind of like basically what I would say would be like Africa, or like an African country, to study these particular type of like serpents that are there and to see how they relate to dragons. And they've never really been studied that much before. She has to go into this kind of like swampy, like real jungly part of this world, and also kind of live with and kind of get to know like a completely different culture and be with different people that, like, you know, she's never seen before. And yeah, it was fun. I enjoyed it, and I like this one isn't full of action. It's because it's kind of more like, not literary, but it's more like scholarly. Like, Lady Trent is a scholar, and she's there to do a job, and a lot of things she says and like how she writes her stories are very like matter of fact. But at the same time, like, you still see there are moments of like big moments and dramatic moments and stuff like that, but it's not just like action. We see a lot of like, you know, studying and drawing and waiting around and stuff like that. But yeah, no, I enjoyed it. I think one of the things I actually love the most about this series is the covers of the books, because I think they're just so beautiful. But yeah, I enjoyed it, and it's a bit slower than like other fantasy books, but if you want something that's a little bit slower, a little bit more laid back, this is a good one to read. And I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I'll be continuing on with the third book. So that's everything I read in February, quite a lot. So if you guys have read any of these, let me know. If you have read any good books in February, I'd also love to know. And thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys again next time.